welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Szeltner in our Washington, D.C. studio. It's good to have you here with us. Pro-life debate continues to cloud the Republican health care plan. The GOP's American Health Care Act would repeal and replace former President Barack Obama's Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. The House version currently includes pro-life protections, but the big question is, will those protections remain in the Senate's version? If those pro-life protections are scrapped in the Senate because of strict budget rules, the health care plan could expand abortion more broadly than Obamacare through tax credits. We are closely monitoring this on EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Joining us now for her analysis is Marjorie Dannenfelser, president of the Susan B. Anthony List, the pro-life advocacy group we are teaming up with for this program. Thank you for being here.
I love being here.
So, Marjorie, can you explain why the pro-life protections may be scrapped in the Senate? What's the deal there?
Well, if you really want to sound like a Capitol Hill insider, say it might not be birdable. What does that mean? Well, there's a senator from West Virginia a long time ago named Senator Byrd, and his rule and the rule that stands now is that it has to be a budget savings. It must deal with a budget for this to stay on the bill. So what does that mean for us? It means that the Planned Parenthood piece that is on there does affect the budget. We know that because we've already been through that with the Congressional Budget Office. But also any Hyde Amendment protection in terms of the health care bill must also be ruled by the parliamentarian as a budgetary item. So that is our concern. Everybody at the White House, everybody in the Senate, everybody in the House, including those who sent the House bill out, who put together this House bill, all want this. There's no question that it's wanted. The question for the pro-life movement and the mandate for the pro-life movement is to make sure that nobody forgets that wanting, that it has to be absolutely, without question, an immovable decision that it must be on that bill or it cannot be voted for.
So defunding Planned Parenthood is financial, but that Hyde language, that pro-life protection, may not be birdable.
That is the issue. Yeah. So birdable is the new vocabulary word for us.
Something to learn.
Yeah.
So we're expecting a Senate vote soon to overturn former President Barack Obama. Shortly before he left office, he created this order that would prevent states from defunding Planned Parenthood. Who will you be monitoring for this vote?
So the House passed this, and now it goes to the Senate. It only takes 50 votes. It cannot be filibustered, so that's the good news. We need 51 votes to win. We will be watching those folks who are up for the Senate in 2018 who are on that sort of middle ground watch list. And we're concerned, very, very concerned, that they might go the wrong way on this. And who are they? They are self-described pro-life member Senator Donnelly, Senator Heitkamp from North Dakota, Senator Tester, Senator Nelson from Florida.
It's good for viewers who might live in those states, maybe reach out to their congressman.
It is vital. In fact, it's moving so quickly that really weighing in right now is vital. And never ask your question, is it worthwhile? It is always worthwhile. The idea that somehow you have a senator that you think has been voting against you a lot doesn't make any difference, especially when we're moving into 2018. They really do hear it, even when you think not. I know because we hear it from folks on the Hill. When I worked on the Hill, I know what happens when somebody pulls the alarm. It's because so much constituent activity's been going on in the office that you know that your member has to adjust or listen or give some feedback, hopefully vote the right way, which is what we want.
They can't ignore the voices that they hear.
Right.
Just last week, Vice President Mike Pence met with some pro-life leaders, including Susan B. Anthony List's Marilyn Musgrave. What have you heard from it? Was it a productive meeting?
It was a very productive meeting. I mean, we're dealing now in a beautiful new day where we visit the White House pretty regularly, and especially in a moment like this when there's so much on the line legislatively. The number one agenda item was to talk to Vice President Pence about that Hyde language in the Obamacare replace bill that we just talked about. The whole issue was whether this will be birdable or not. It is not in the Vice President's control or the House's control or even the random senator's control about whether it will be birdable. There is one person who will decide whether this Hyde language stays. It's the parliamentarian. The issue we wanted to get across is if it's not in there, if the Hyde Amendment is not in there, just as when we discussed this in Obamacare just 7 years ago, we cannot vote for it because it'll be taxpayer funding of abortion again, and we just we're planning to move out of that.
And there will be an impact for those who don't support pro-life
That's right.
protections as well. And our viewers, we're going to go to our call to action after this, and our viewers can see how they can also be involved in the pro-life movement. Marjorie Dannenfelser, thank you.
Thank you, as always.
There is a way for you to be involved with the pro-life movement. For this week's call to action, we are asking you, our viewers, to send a direct letter to your member of Congress and ask your representative to defund Planned Parenthood through the reconciliation bill. Here is the simple step for you to take. Go to sba-list.org/defundpp. At this website, you can send a direct letter to your U.S. representative with the message, Defund Planned Parenthood. This letter will encourage your congressman to support a reconciliation bill that has the pro-life protections we discussed, defunds Planned Parenthood, and redirects money to life-affirming clinics. If you want to be involved in the pro-life movement and have your voice heard, this is the one simple way that you can do that. Once again, go to sba-list.org/defundpp. Be sure to share this call to action with your friends and family on social media. Now for more life-related news, Florida will now require a unanimous jury recommendation before the death penalty can be imposed. Governor Rick Scott signed the bill into law Monday. The House approved the measure with 112 to 3 votes last week. It came one day after the Florida Senate unanimously passed it. This is a rare case of a death penalty issue receiving bipartisan support. In Texas, lawmakers in the state's House debate a bill that would require hospitals to bury or cremate babies who have been aborted or miscarried. Republican Representative Byron Cook proposed the measure, saying baby remains otherwise go to garbage disposals. A Senate committee has passed a Senate version of the bill, but a federal judge has already blocked a state rule requiring the same thing. Hawaii Senate advances an assisted suicide bill with a 22-3 vote. The bill would allow adults with a prognosis of 6 months or fewer to ask for a fatal prescription of drugs. Hawaii's Catholic Conference says the bill undermines trusted relationships with health advisors and creates suspicion for Hawaii's patients. The bill now heads to the state's House of Representatives for debate in committee. Also in the Aloha State, Hawaii Senate passes a bill requiring pregnancy centers to promote abortions. The pastor of a Christian Calvary Chapel, Pearl Harbor, calls it a bully bill. In a video posted online, Pastor Gerald Skinner says his group's pro-life center is in their church, so they will be forced to promote abortion in their church. If the bill passes, he calls it a violation of the First Amendment. Pro-lifers are often accused of forcing their religious beliefs on others. But we are not pro-life simply because that's what our Catholic faith tells us. We are pro-life because it is a truth supported by faith, science, and reason. I had the chance recently to sit down with the top bioethics expert, Carter Snead. I asked him, from a purely bioethical standpoint, what is your argument against abortion?
I'd say the easiest argument to make in public terms that don't depend on overtly religious commitments is the pro-life argument in the context of abortion. It turns on 2 principles. One is the biological reality of the unborn child's identity. Every embryology textbook that is used today acknowledges that the human organism that emerges from fertilization is a living member of the human species. It's a member of the species Homo sapiens, the living whole human organism that directs herself along a developmental trajectory that is species specific and on her own power. She needs, of course, like we all do, a natural environment to support her life and so on. And I say her because at conception there is sex. We have embryos are male or female, and you can test for that. In fact, they do in sex selection in the context of IVF.
Right.
So the first idea is what we're talking about here is a living member of the human species, and that's inarguable as a biological matter. That doesn't require any religious conceptions at all. And then the second argument is an argument about justice and equality, which is nested in our nation's most foundational documents, most specifically the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and the idea that human beings all deserve equal protection under the law. And if you're going to exclude an entire segment of the human family from the protection of the law because they're small or dependent or biologically immature or temporarily incapable of certain kinds of high-level biological functioning, that's an injustice of the highest order. That's a lethal form of discrimination. And that argument doesn't require you to be a Christian or a Jew or a theist of any kind. If you recognize the fundamental categories of biology and the principles of equality and equal justice under the law, which we all do as members of America, of the American civilization, then you should be able to understand and agree to the pro-life proposition.
That's a human rights issue, and that's
fundamental equality.
You've been calling for the defunding of Planned Parenthood from federal funding from Medicaid for years.
Yes.
Why is that?
I don't think any institution that provides abortions, and Planned Parenthood, let's just be clear, is the single greatest provider of largest provider of abortion in the United States. They make hundreds of millions of dollars a year. They abort hundreds of thousands of children a year. I don't think any institution like that should receive taxpayer funding as a mandatory legal principle. I don't think taxpayers should be required to hand their money over to an organization that is the largest purveyor of abortion in America. If Planned Parenthood, President Trump just made an extraordinary offer, one I've never seen made in the public square, that if you stop doing abortions, then you can get all this public funding. And I think that's a fantastic proposal on his part, because it will force Planned Parenthood to say, because they always say, oh, it's only 3% of what we do. If it's only 3% of what you do, it shouldn't be a big deal. Stop doing abortions and you get the federal money. But if they refuse, as they have initially refused to do, that means they care more about abortion than any other aspect of their operation. And that's an important thing to reveal to the American people.
And in fact, the President, Cecile Richards, said it was a vital part of what they do,
That's
abortion.
an ironic use of the word vital,
So,
but yes.
Carter Snead, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you again to Carter Snead. Abortion is a topic that has split the U.S. nation for decades. But can we learn more behind those divisive polling numbers? Is there a pro-life message that truly resonates with most Americans? We turn to an expert on the issue to find out more. Chris Wilson is the CEO of WPA. He is also the former director of research for Senator Ted Cruz's 2016 presidential campaign. Chris, thank you for being here.
You bet. Thanks for having me on, Catherine.
So it's been a few months since November, but I'd still love your analysis. How much was the pro-life issue an element of President Trump's success?
Well, I think it was significant. It was significant not just because pro-lifers turned out and voted for Donald Trump. It's also significant they voted against Hillary Clinton. I think in the same element of passion that motivates someone to vote for a candidate like Trump, he may not have been as passionate about the life issues as, say, Ted Cruz would have been, just to speak to the candidate I worked for. But they also knew, pro-lifers knew, that Hillary Clinton would be against them, that she was not going to take pro-life stand, that she would continue things like federal funding of abortions and even federal taxpayer funding of abortions overseas. And those sorts of issues were motivational. And I know the Trump campaign smartly used those issues to try and motivate some of the voters that might have stayed home and may not have voted for Donald Trump because they were evangelicals, may have been turned off by other issues for him, hardcore, passionate pro-life Catholics. And so from that level of communication, they did a good job of targeting and turning them out. And it had a significant impact at the end of the day on Election Day and into his victory.
Now, you say the mainstream media needs to stop using the term anti-abortion. Why is that?
Well, it's just dishonest. It's not reflective of who pro-lifers are. And I tweeted that out, and I actually had a few reporters come back to me. I had the fortunate experience on the Cruz campaign to build fairly good relationships with a lot of people, a lot of members of the mainstream media, and they pushed back, saying, well, I say pro-abortion rights and anti-abortion rights. And so, well, it's not about abortion rights only when you're pro-life. You take a strong stand on issues like you may be against the death penalty, for instance. You may be, or most likely are against assisted suicide, against euthanasia. And so the life issue encompasses more than just abortion. It's a big part of it. But whenever you classify pro-lifers as being just against one issue, it's like calling Democrats just one issue. And they don't do that. And in fact, to me, pro-choice means I'm pro-choice when it comes to school choice. And so that in and of itself as a label, I think is dishonest as to who that side is. And so from that point of view, I think it is important that if the media is going to apply labels and they're going to classify who a movement is, that they are honest in the representation. And anti-abortion is not honest in its representation of who pro-lifers are.
So let's look at some of the polling, what that shows. At what point in a pregnancy do you see a shift in attitude? Do you see people start to shift away from thinking abortion is actually an acceptable option?
Well, there's two ways to answer that. One is sort of a scientific way of whenever life becomes viable. And some might argue that you cannot prove that out scientifically. Some would argue that you can. Then you move to just sort of a timeline issue. And from a timeline perspective, as you move through the course of the timeline, you find even at a point of 3 months, 6 months on the other side. So after 3 months, you find 54% of Democrats would fall under a pro-life classification. So really after the first trimester, it's really that line of demarcation in which it becomes unacceptable to a large majority, 77% of Americans would classify themselves as pro-life against abortion after that first trimester.
So is it possible there are people who actually hold pro-life views but still label themselves and still choose to say pro-choice?
Well, that really gets back to your first question, is as the media applies these labels, they misclassify who people are. And so the answer to your question is very simply yes. 54% of people who call themselves pro-choice are against abortion after the first trimester. And so that, I think, is important to recognize for people who are pro-life, is as we talk about this as a timeline issue or as we talk about it as a viability issue, that we bring in almost 8 in 10 Americans agree with the pro-life movement on those issues. They just kind of fall into a different labeling or classification because they feel like it's the politically correct thing to do.
The labels pro-life and pro-choice may not be an actually accurate reflection.
No, there's no question, and the data would show that it's not an accurate representation just because of those numbers we just discussed.
So based on what you've seen, based on your research, is there a pro-life message that's actually really winning in America? One that pro-lifers can really get behind and know they can speak with confidence and that it resonates with most people?
Well, first of all, let me say, being pro-life is a winning message for any candidate running for just about any office. I mean, there may be a congressional district in Massachusetts where that's not the case, but just about everywhere else it is. And in fact, it's a motivational issue more so for those who define themselves pro-life. By almost 2-to-1 margin, someone who is pro-life says that they will only vote for a pro-life candidate than over someone who is pro-choice being only willing to vote for a pro-choice candidate. So it's already, you start with a 2-to-1 edge if you're a pro-life, regardless of where the voter is. From that standpoint, in terms of how you define it, again, it's important to talk about it as an issue around life. It's important to talk about an issue around viability. And frankly, it is from a candidate's perspective, and as the candidates I work for, and let me say, I think I only work with pro-life candidates, so I'm never having to advise someone who doesn't hold this position, because to me, it's a fundamentally important representation of who an individual is. And so anyone who doesn't share my beliefs there, our beliefs there in terms of this issue, I wouldn't work for in the first place. But when I'm talking to them and trying to coach someone on how to speak to this issue, if they've got an electorate that maybe is not as pro-life as might otherwise be the case, like say if you're looking at a race in Massachusetts or in Maryland versus a race in Texas or Iowa, it's important to talk about, again, in terms of life, it's in terms of viability, in terms of timeline, because if you are able to talk about it in terms of specifics of the issue, the interesting aspect is the radicalism of the Democratic Party on this issue. They still speak of partial birth abortion as something that is acceptable. And as long as you're discussing it in terms of as an issue that voters don't see acceptable, it makes it really easy to win on.
Chris Wilson, thank you so much for your insight on this.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
When we come back, we call out a common Planned Parenthood misconception and profile former abortion workers who are now speaking out for life. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Every child who, rather than being born, is condemned unjustly to being aborted, bears the face of Jesus Christ. We remember the strong pro-life words Pope Francis once gave to Catholic healthcare professionals, as this week marks 4 years since his papal election. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Catherine Szeltner. For this week's Speak Out segment, we're calling out the U.S. Senate Minority Leader for repeating a common lie about Planned Parenthood services. New York Senator Chuck Schumer tweeted this out last week. Trump Care cuts Planned Parenthood funds, hurting millions of women who turn there for mammograms, maternity care, cancer screenings, and more. Senator Schumer, it is a lie that Planned Parenthood provides mammograms. It is not true, and it is irresponsible to promote that misconception. Senator Schumer, you have a responsibility to clarify and tell the American people the truth. Planned Parenthood does not provide mammograms. Even the president of Planned Parenthood admitted this herself. While testifying under oath before a House committee in 2015, Cecile Richards said, "We do not have mammogram machines at our health centers, and we've never stated that we did." Senator Schumer stopped repeating the misleading and deceitful claim about mammograms. You can even fact-check for yourself. The Food and Drug Administration frequently updates a list of certified mammography facilities. Planned Parenthood is nowhere to be found there. But you know which groups do provide mammograms? Community health centers. Let's redirect federal funds to them. This common lie about mammograms is just another way Planned Parenthood tries to draw in patients. But Planned Parenthood needs to be called what it really is, an abortion business. Remember, there is something you can do to counter today's culture of death by following this week's call to action. Send a letter to your member of Congress to defund Planned Parenthood via the reconciliation process. Go to sba-list.org/defundpp. Some of the strongest voices against the abortion industry are the very people who used to work in them. Former Planned Parenthood Director Abby Johnson has been one of those brave, outspoken voices. And for our pro-life focus segment this week, we introduce you to more abortion workers she helped to make the pro-life jump.
Anytime there's a large human tragedy, such as abortion, people look for someone to blame.
Abby Johnson has been on both sides of abortion industry walls. A post-abortive mother herself, Johnson was the director of a Texas Planned Parenthood clinic before making a very public conversion to the pro-life movement and the Catholic faith. She's seen the deceit of the abortion business firsthand, and now Johnson is helping others leave the industry with her group, And Then There Were None.
One of the biggest successes that we've had is just the sheer number of people who have come to us.
Now in year 4, her ministry has helped over 330 abortion clinic workers leave and 7 full-time abortion doctors transition to life-affirming clinics.
Our goal within Then There Were None is to show the humanity of people who are working in the industry, that they're normal people, their moms, their wives, their daughters.
2 of those everyday women open up about why they decided to exit the abortion industry.
I was drinking heavily. My marriage was pretty much done. My kids were angry with me, and I was working 6 days a week, 10 to 12-hour shifts. And after packing up the entire clinic by myself with just a few staff members, I was told this might not be the place for you. You just don't fit in. And I was like, yeah, you're right.
For former Planned Parenthood manager Sue Thayer, the decision came after her clinic started performing webcam abortions.
And I remember them saying, if you are breathing, you can do a vaginal ultrasound. It helps if you've played a video game because it's a lot like running a joystick. And I said, is this even legal to do this? And they said, all of our I's are dotted and our T's are crossed and nothing will stop us.
Now on the outside of the abortion industry, these women help shatter stereotypes and give valuable insight to pro-lifers.
You do get a hardening of the heart when you work there, which is probably why people have the misconception that they do. It's, oh, they love to be there and they're defending it so vehemently. But it's because you do have this hardening of your heart, and then it's almost like this darkness just overtakes you. Your humor becomes dark. You become dark. It's just a very dark industry.
If you ask them how the transition has been so far, they admit the path has its rough patches.
Oof.
You lose all your friends and you have to get all new friends.
Yeah.
Really. I mean, in the process of like flipping sides, it's a big adjustment, but it's the best adjustment you'll ever make.
The biggest benefit for me was I got my family back.
For Abby Johnson, seeing other abortion workers make the brave jump is part of her mission to end abortion from the inside out.
The best moments of my life are when I'm on the phone with someone when they're walking out of their job for the last time. You can almost hear the unburdening in their voice and just the joy, just the sheer joy.
If you are working in the abortion industry and want information about how you can leave your job, or if you simply want to know more about And Then There Were None, visit abortionworker.com. That's it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. You can reach us anytime with questions, ideas, comments at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com. I look forward to seeing you here again next week. Life is a gift. God bless.